Hello indie game fans, Baldur's Gate 3 has thrown the doors wide open for the CRPG or computer RPG, a holdover term from the 80s that differentiated between video games and tabletop RPGs like Dungeons & Dragons. So let's begin with Shadow of the Road, which has been in development for a long time, but the good news is that since we last took a look, this has gotten a new trailer which shows off more of this title, which is set in feudal Japan. However, what drew me to the game in the first place is that this has both magical yokai to battle, as well as steampunk technology like flamethrowers and even a scorpion tank, so I have no idea how swords will fare against the latter, which is why it's extra interesting. If you're a sucker for the Dungeons & Dragons type of fantasy RPG setting, a title to watch is probably Realms Beyond Ashes of the Fallen, a game that holds true to its tabletop RPG roots since it is based on the open game license created by Wizards of the Coast and is set, again, in an open world with non-linear exploration. You will be able to create a party of 6 characters from 7 races and 8 classes, so there's plenty of permutations there alone, with a pretty slick throwback look as well. However, this game had a successful Kickstarter back in 2018 with an initial planned release in 2020, but the developer's last post on Twitter was in 2021, so I have no idea what is going on, with backers of course saying that this is a scam, where it doesn't look good in this particular case, so I'll give it another year or so. An impressive looking CRPG title with potential is Revolution the Spark, set in a steampunk world, but where the rich are oppressing the commoners under the protection of the Queen. So in a very French Revolution kind of way, a revolution is brewing and you need to ignite the spark. Revolutions are always an interesting setting, especially given the examples from history of how things can get so out of whack that it forces the hand of the majority, in which our hero is an ex-military commander that is fed up with the government and takes action, being able to recruit up to 25 characters and has a classic grid-based combat system. However, similar to the previous title, this developer's last tweet was in 2022, which was their planned release window, but no news since then might mean that this is stalled or cancelled, so we'll have to wait and see on this. There are quite a number of games that intentionally use the throwback visuals of the 90s in their games, such as Vendir, Plague of Lies, a game which has a twist which you'll see later on in this trailer. Set in a grimdark world in a land oppressed by the royal family, lead your band of heroes that have to challenge the throne. Interestingly, while it has an isometric camera angle, combat appears to be Pokemon-style turn-based combat, which I was not expecting, so it is something different to keep an eye on. We're talking about the Steam release here, since some version of this is available on mobile. Another game with a throwback look is the Necromancer's Tale, a game which has undergone significant development since we last took a look, which is good, in which you play as a necromancer hiding in plain sight, having to train your skills while navigating society, biding your time until you are ready with your minions to march against your enemies. Interestingly, this appears to have a dialogue UI similar to Disco Elysium, which is probably best in class right now at this point in time, and with this having over 150 characters to interact with, could be very interesting indeed. You can be diplomatic to forge alliances, use blackmail, coercion, or even seduction to get characters on your side. However, it is not a narrative-only CRPG since you can summon skeletons, in which battles take place on a hexagonal grid and looks neat. The developer also seems to place an added emphasis on having to master the rituals in the spellbook, so I wonder how in-depth that would be if you can fail a spell for example and the consequences of that, but it looks to be coming along quite nicely.
There's a spectre haunting the fiefdom of London Stock. He's waiting for you to feast on each other before it blooms in a dazzling explosion. This is your last day, Weald, and I am sorry for that.
Another game following in the footsteps of Disco Elysium is Glasshouse, a self-described narrative-driven survival CRPG set in a post-capitalist world. Apparently, you're trying to win a condominium election, which is a strange motivation, in which there is a larger political conspiracy to unravel, along with the expected character interactions. You can also construct makeshift tools and equipment for your use, and there is a combat element like in Disco Elysium, not explicitly like in Baldur's Gate, but rather as an option that shows up in dialogue, looking to have an intriguing setting.
For many ages, the Slavenes had languished under the reign of the Veyron Empire. With magic and technology, the Veronians ruled over the known world. It seemed like nothing could shake their might.
We only have a cinematic trailer for tribal Slavene kingdoms, so here are some tasty screenshots in which this is set in a fantasy world drawing upon Slavic mythology, having a hexagonal world map and what appears to be impressive looking art, so I'll be waiting for more updates on this. Hardcore CRPG fans will be familiar with developer Spiderweb Software, which is headed up by Jeff Vogel, an indie developer that was indie before indie was cool, with this company being founded way back in 1994, and with all of the games having a similar visual style, from Queen's Wish, Avernum, Abaddon, and now Geneforge 2 Infestation, the remaster of a game from 2003, which is set in a classic high fantasy world. There's magic and dragons, as well as custom-made mutants that you can command, adding a ton of variety and possible strategies that you can use. Also, it is very open with decisions to make, resulting in multiple endings, where if you love the genre, these games are definitely worth checking out. I'm not too big a fan of the semi-modern day urban setting since it can feel rather vanilla at some point, where of course the most common enemy in this setting would be zombies, and lo and behold, Urban Strife is exactly that. Your survivors are struggling to survive, having to venture out to scavenge for resources in order to head back home to rebuild and reinforce the shelter, recruiting an array of characters, including deranged locals to help in the fight. We've seen this exact setup a dozen times already, so I don't know what is fresh or new here, so I'll be waiting to see more, although they could be solely focused on beautiful execution of this concept, which has its merits as well. This next title is releasing very soon and was in my preview of the best upcoming games of January, in which Unforetold Witchstone has some serious horsepower behind it, being set in a world created by Ed Greenwood, who is the creator of the Forgotten Realms. Most critically, it has a non-linear narrative system in which relationships and outcomes shift dynamically based on your choices, and who to help and which quest to complete, with the gimmick being that it is a living world. Interestingly, you will be able to recruit any NPC in the game, which is interesting, looking like a very ambitious title, so look out for the early access release in January 2024. This next title is a throwback in more ways than one, in which the visuals and colour palette of Scout Against the Black Prairie immediately jumps out, looking like it was made for the Commodore 64, and while I myself have no particular nostalgia for that system, I'm sure that some of you do. Set in a grimdark Lovecraftian-inspired world, gather a party of characters and go on adventures, having classic turn-based, grid-based combat, and also freeform exploration of the world, with this recently getting an updated release window of Q2 2024, so we should be seeing it soon. One of the best looking modern CRPGs is New Arc Line, having an awesome setting as well that mixes steampunk with arcane magic, in which you face off against all sorts of horrible monsters, in a world that is varied due to the different fantasy races like elves and dwarves, along with zeppelins and Tesla guns. You play as a new immigrant to this land, which appears to be wonderful on the surface, but of course hides a darker secret, having free-form character creation that reminds me of Neverwinter Nights, since the characters in the world have their own prejudices and will react to your race, gender, background, appearance, and so on, looking like one of the most promising titles. Fans of the channel will be familiar with Sovereign Syndicate, since I've covered this narrative CRPG in the past, with the good news being that it will release in January 2024, so you will be able to get your hands on it soon. Set in the Victorian steampunk world, society's downtrodden are disappearing and all signs point towards a cult, so you need to investigate this mystery. However, it does have an interesting 3-character setup in a Minotaur Magician, an Automaton and a Corsair, with their intertwining fates being how the story unfolds, with it also having a tarot card system instead of random stat points for the RPG elements. One of the most hyped releases is Broken Roads, which can be thought of as Fallout Australia, since this game is set in a post-apocalyptic land down under as you attempt to uncover the secrets of the Outback. The Steam page doesn't give much information on the narrative setup, so we'll have to see on that, but it does have the classic turn-based combat, as well as an interesting moral compass system, which is their take on morality in games, being not just the simple Paragon-Renegade dichotomy, but more complex instead, in which decisions made will shift a character's spot on the compass, so let's see if it is as intriguing as the Thought Cabinet system. A high fantasy title of interest that looks awesome is Zoria Age of Shattering, a game set in a world besieged by Hellspawn, whose actions and occupation has drastically changed the landscape and cities of the world. You have a party of 4 heroes, each having unique companion missions, as well as a base to call home, which will be critical since equipment and your hero's vitality will deteriorate over time. The combat looks awesome with a number of synergistic abilities that can be used together as you take on all sorts of monsters and releases in March 2024. If you prefer Diablo-style isometric action RPGs, then you'll have to watch this video for more.